When I arrive at my daughter's house, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach the moment I pushed through the gate. Sarah's belongings were scattered across the yard like discarded trash, and from inside the house, my son-in-law's voice thundered with rage. All she has to do is sign the papers. Why is she making this so difficult? The sound of shattering glass punctuated his words. My daughter's choked sob followed. Then my grandson's pleading voice cut to the chaos. Please don't hurt Mommy. I promise I'll be good. I didn't hesitate. I ran inside, pulled him away from Sarah, and immediately called his parents. Get here now, I commanded, my voice shaking with fury. If you don't, my next call is to the police. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. But before I continue, I'd love it if you could subscribe to Elderly Stories and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We truly want to know how far our stories travel. Earlier that suffocating afternoon, I had driven my old car to Sarah's house, my anxiety mounting with every mile. I hadn't been able to reach her for 2 days. Every call went straight to voicemail. Every text message disappeared into a void of silence. This wasn't like Sarah at all. She had never made me worry like this before. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I tried to calm myself, but my heart hammered against my chest with such force it hurt. When I turned onto her street, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. The white iron gate that she always kept securely locked now hung halfway open, swinging lazily in the hot wind. I parked quickly and stepped out, my legs trembling beneath me. Pushing the gate wider, I entered the yard, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs. The small garden where Sarah lovingly tended every flower and plant now looked like an abandoned dumping ground. The floral dress I'd given her just last week lay crumpled in the dirt. Her wedding photo, still in its frame, was face down near a broken bougainvillea branch. Most heartbreaking of all was Ethan's teddy bear, his most treasured possession, the one he hugged every night, lying abandoned and dirty beside the debris. I stood frozen, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of the scene. Then Mark's voice exploded from inside the house, hoarse and seething with fury. You just have to sign it, Sarah. Don't make me do this the hard way. The crash of breaking porcelain followed his words. Between the sounds of destruction, I heard Ethan's small voice, trembling with fear. Daddy, please don't hurt Mommy. I promise I'll be good. I won't ask for toys anymore. The boy's terrified plea pierced straight through my soul. Then came Sarah's weak voice, barely audible, almost begging. Mark, please don't scare Ethan. Her voice faded, choked by tears. I couldn't stand there another second. I ran to the front door and pounded on it with both fists, shouting, Sarah, Sarah, open the door. The heavy wooden door remained shut. It was locked from the inside. Fear and rage mixed inside me like a raging inferno. Without thinking, I ran around a back door that opened into the kitchen. Fortunately, it was only secured with a simple wooden latch. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and slammed my shoulder against it with all my strength. The latch cracked and gave way. I stumbled forward, nearly falling as I burst inside. The living room looked like a war zone. An overturned chair, shattered porcelain scattered everywhere. And in the middle of the chaos, I saw something that froze my blood solid. Mark had a fistful of Sarah's hair clutched in his hand, yanking it violently, forcing her head back at a painful angle. My daughter's face was deathly pale, soaked with tears, with an angry red mark blazing across her cheek. Her eyes that used to shine with joy whenever she saw me, now showed nothing but terror and desperation. In the corner, Ethan was curled into a tight ball, his small hands covered his mouth as he tried desperately not to cry out loud. His wide eyes, full of fear, watched the scene unfold. He was only 5 years old, but his gaze held the haunted look of someone who had witnessed far too much suffering. I wanted to run to him, to scoop him into my arms, but first I had to save my daughter. When Mark saw me, he stopped for a moment, surprised and furious, but he didn't release Sarah. The rage inside me erupted with volcanic force, so intense that my fears simply vanished. I screamed with every ounce of strength I possessed, my voice cracking with indignation. You bastard! Let go of my daughter right now. I charged at him without thinking, my nails raking across his arm, digging into his skin. I shoved him with all the ferocious strength of a mother defending her child. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled backward and finally released her. I seized the moment. I grabbed Sarah and pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly. Her body shook violently. Her breathing came in shallow, rapid gasps, as if she might faint at any moment. I turned and pulled Ethan toward me. My precious grandson clung to my chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Standing in the middle of that destroyed room, with my daughter in one arm and my grandson in the other, I felt my entire world crumbling around me. Mark stood across from us, breathing heavily, his eyes red and wild like a cornered beast. He stared at us without speaking, but in his gaze burned a hatred so intense it seemed to want to devour us whole. As I held Sarah's fragile, trembling body, my mind flashed back to the day I gave her away to Mark at their wedding. That day in Chicago, the sky had been crystal clear, with sunlight filtering through the oak trees in golden shafts. Sarah had looked radiant in her white dress, glowing like a sunflower in full bloom. Mark, standing at her side, had taken her hand and looked at me with what seemed like genuine sincerity. His voice had been firm and steady. "Don't worry, Mrs. Linda. I will never let anyone hurt her. I will protect Sarah for the rest of my life." At that moment, I had believed him completely. I thought my daughter had found a good man, someone who would care for her just as I had always dreamed. I remembered an autumn afternoon 5 years earlier, when Sarah first brought Mark home to meet me. He'd worn a perfectly pressed white shirt and carried a basket of fresh fruit, apples, grapes, and juicy oranges. He spoke softly and always held my gaze respectfully. He'd talked about his job at a financial firm with a tone that was proud yet humble. He spoke of his plans for the future, a small, cozy house, children who would one day run through the yard. When he took Sarah's hand and gazed at her tenderly, he turned to me and said, "Mrs. Linda, I love Sarah very much. I just want her to be happy." I had smiled and nodded, thinking my daughter was truly lucky. They married soon after. Sarah used money she had saved through years of hard work to buy a little house in the suburbs. I contributed what I could. It wasn't much, but it was everything I had after so many years of struggle. Back then, Mark had beaten his chest and promised he would work tirelessly to pay me back, so I wouldn't carry that debt. I watched him paint the house a cheerful mint green alongside Sarah. I watched her carefully plant a bougainvillea vine by the porch, tying each branch with such care, as if she were tending to her dream of a happy family. The day Ethan was born, I saw Mark awkwardly cradling the tiny baby in the hospital, tears streaming down his face. He'd hugged Sarah and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I saw my daughter smile, a smile of pure, genuine happiness. Everything began to change when Mark started doing well at work. He was promoted. He began wearing expensive suits and polished shoes. But with success came transformation. He started coming home late. Sometimes he wouldn't return all night. His eyes remained glued to his phone screen, muttering about numbers rising and falling in the stock market. I remember visiting once and finding him at the table, endlessly swiping through his phone without even glancing at Sarah, who was trying to calm a fussy Ethan in her arms. She'd looked at him with such sadness and disappointment, but had simply lowered her head in silence. Then came the secret late-night phone calls. "Mom, I heard Mark talking to someone at midnight," Sarah had told me, her voice trembling. He was saying something about money, about debts, but when I asked him about it, he got furious and yelled at me to stay out of it. I'd advised her to talk to him directly, but deep in my heart, I knew Sarah was already beginning to be afraid. Little by little, valuable things began disappearing from the house. The new television, the set of dishes I'd given them for their first anniversary, even the gold rings Sarah had worn since her college graduation. Everything vanished. Sarah had lied to me, claiming things were broken or lost. But I knew she wasn't skilled at hiding the truth. One day, I pressed her to tell me what was really happening, and she burst into tears. She confessed that she'd sold her car, the gift I'd given her when she finished college, to pay one of Mark's debts. The car was badly damaged. It couldn't be fixed, she told me, but her red, swollen eyes and evasive gaze betrayed her words. I held her with a broken heart, knowing there was nothing I could do except be there for her. The breaking point came a few months ago when Mark lost a significant amount of money gambling online. He came home a changed man, no longer the person who had once held Sarah's hand with tenderness. He demanded she sign papers to mortgage the house Sarah had bought with her own hard-earned money, without him contributing a single dollar. "Just sign it, Sarah," he told her in a voice that was soft but icy cold. "We'll get out of this. I promise I'll win it all back." But Sarah, for the first time in 5 years of marriage, said no. A firm, decisive no, though it was filled with fear. Since that day, Mark had turned completely against her. He began humiliating her, calling her useless, a freeloader. He threatened to make her lose her job, to tell everyone she was unstable. There were nights when Sarah would run to my house, crying uncontrollably in my arms, and I knew everything had spiraled completely out of control. Once, she showed me a copy of divorce papers Mark had already prepared. In them, Sarah supposedly voluntarily gave up all assets in custody of Ethan, leaving everything to him. I'd read those lines with trembling hands, nearly dropping the paper. "I'm so scared, Mom," she'd whispered, her voice breaking. "He says if I don't sign, he won't leave us alone, that he'll make me lose my job, that he'll tell everyone I'm crazy." When I finally pulled Sarah free from Mark's grasp, I felt my chest would burst with rage and pain. I positioned Sarah and Ethan behind me, using my body as a shield to protect them. I looked Mark directly in the eyes, seeing the hatred reflected there, but I wasn't afraid. My voice turned cold, each word dropping like a stone. "The moment you dare to lay a hand on my daughter and grandson, this stopped being your business alone." Without giving him a chance to respond, I pulled out my phone. Mark twisted his mouth into a sneer, as if he thought I was merely bluffing. But my hand, though shaking slightly with rage, dialed the number quickly. On the other end was Mr. Richard, Mark's father. I didn't bother with pleasantries or explanations. I spoke plainly. "Mr. Richard, get to your son's house immediately. I'm giving you 30 minutes. If you don't show up, my next call is to the police." I hung up just as he began stammering questions, giving him no opportunity to argue. Mark froze. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He hadn't expected me to be serious. He began pacing the living room like a caged animal, occasionally punching the wall with brutal force. The thuds echoed through the house, making me flinch, but I wasn't focused on him anymore. My only concern was getting Sarah and Ethan to safety. I led mother and son to Ethan's bedroom and locked the door behind us. The small room still carried the soft scent of the child's blanket, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Sarah sat on the bed, silent, her empty eyes staring into nothing. Her face was ghostly pale, as if all life had been drained from her. I knelt in front of Ethan and gently wiped a smudge from his forehead with a damp cloth, trying to comfort him. "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandma is here with you now." But the boy's wide eyes remained filled with fear, as if he didn't believe the nightmare was truly over. I sat beside Sarah and took her hand. It was ice cold. Her slender fingers trembled in mine. I wanted to say something comforting, but my throat closed up with emotion. Through the crack beneath the door, I could still hear Mark muttering insults, every word cut like a knife. I hugged Sarah tightly and whispered, "I won't let this continue, honey. I promise." But deep down, I knew that promise wouldn't be easy to keep. Mark was not someone who let things go easily. Exactly 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang, its sharp sound cutting through the silence. I heard Mark's heavy footsteps as he went to answer it. Mr. Richard entered first, a heavy-set man with a scowling face, as if coming here was a tremendous inconvenience. Behind him was Mrs. Teresa, Mark's mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face drawn, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Seeing the destroyed living room, overturned furniture, scattered porcelain, the heavy atmosphere, Mr. Richard merely frowned. Mrs. Teresa let out a small gasp and covered her mouth with her hand. I opened the bedroom door and stepped out to face them. Sarah followed behind, her hand still gripping Ethan's. The boy clung to his mother's side, his terrified eyes fixed on his grandparents. I didn't waste time with preliminaries. I pointed to the yard where Sarah's and Ethan's belongings were still scattered in the sun. The floral dress, the wedding frame, the teddy bear. Then I pointed to the red mark blazing across Sarah's cheek, the clear imprint of a hand, a silent accusation. Finally, I gestured toward Ethan, the trembling child clutching his mother with small, desperate hands. My voice was crystal clear, each word heavy as a stone. Look, this is a happiness your son promised he would give my daughter. Mrs. Teresa looked down, her shoulders shaking. She didn't dare meet my eyes. I saw her reddened eyes, but she remained silent. Mr. Richard was different. He crossed his arms and spoke in a dismissive tone, as if discussing the weather. Men get heated sometimes. Fights between spouses happen. You're exaggerating. Let them work it out themselves. Then he turned to Sarah with a reproachful edge. You probably said something provoking like this, didn't you? Hearing that, my anger erupted like a volcano. I trembled, not from fear, but from sheer indignation. I stared at him and spoke with a voice of steel. If you can't raise your son properly, the law will. I'm calling the police. He scoffed with contemptuous laughter, a defiant smile crossing his face. Go ahead and report him if you're so tough. Let's see if the police believe a bitter mother-in-law or a husband who claims his wife was unfaithful and racked up debts. His words were a slap across my face. He dared to fabricate lies, to slander my daughter right in front of me. I wanted to scream at him, to strike him, but I knew that would only make matters worse. I realized that talking to these people was utterly useless. They didn't want to see the truth. They didn't want to admit their son had become a cruel man. I turned to Sarah, my voice firm and decisive. Honey, grab a few necessary things. We're at my house right now. Sarah nodded, her gaze still blank, but she obeyed silently. I helped her pack some of Ethan's clothes and bag, and grabbed a few of his favorite toys. Ethan stuck close to my legs without a word, simply watching his mother with worried eyes. I took the boy's hand and walked Sarah to the door, passing directly in front of Mark and his parents. He stood there, his gaze full of hatred, but he didn't dare stop us. Before leaving, I paused and looked directly at Mr. Richard. I spoke slowly but with absolute firmness. Keep trusting your son. You'll see. One day you'll regret this deeply. He didn't answer. He simply looked at me with cold indifference. Mrs. Teresa remained standing there, her hands trembling, her eyes fixed on the floor as if she desperately wanted to escape it all. A few days later, Sarah suddenly remembered she'd left some important project documents from work at the old house, along with several of Ethan's school books. The boy had a test coming up soon, and Sarah was afraid he'd be negatively affected if he didn't have his materials. I saw her wringing her hands, anxiously, hesitant. Mom, I think I have to go back and get them. I cut her off immediately. No, honey, let me go. I don't want you to face Mark. I don't want you to set foot in that place that's become a nightmare. She looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and worry, then nodded and handed me the spare key. I drove to the familiar street, my heart pounding in my chest. I parked the car in a secluded spot and watched from a distance, waiting until I saw Mark's car leave. He usually left around that time, probably to meet his gambling friends or loan sharks. When I was certain he was gone, I stepped out of the car, gripping the key tightly. I took a deep breath to steady myself. The white gate still hung ajar, as if it remembered the horror of that day. I entered, deliberately avoiding looking at the withered bougainvillea, its broken branches still scattered on the ground. Inside, the house felt cold and chaotic. A smell of dampness mixed with stale tobacco turned my stomach. I went straight to Ethan's room and quickly gathered his school books, placing them in a tote bag. I also collected some of his favorite toys, hoping they would brighten his days a little. As I was leaving, I passed Mark's home office, the room he always kept locked, as if hiding dark secrets. But that day, the door stood slightly ajar, a crack that seemed to beckon me forward. I was going to walk past, but something on the desk caught my attention. Sarah's black briefcase, the one she used for work papers, sat open on the desk. I hesitated, feeling an inner voice urging me to investigate. I entered slowly, trying not to make a sound, as if afraid of awakening something invisible. My eyes scanned Mark's desk, covered in messy papers and scattered pens. Then I saw them. 2 folders placed conspicuously amidst the chaos. I picked up the first one, and my heart began racing. It was a mutual divorce petition. I flipped to the last page, and when I saw the signature, Sarah Miller, written clearly, my chest tightened, but something wasn't right. The handwriting was stiff, lacking Sarah's characteristic flowing smoothness. I'd seen her sign her name hundreds of times, from thank you cards to work contracts. This signature was not my daughter's. With trembling hands, I picked up the second folder, mortgage agreement on land use and adjacent properties. Listed as a debtor, Sarah. The creditor, a financial company I'd never heard of. The signature was identical to the one on the previous document, cold and obviously fake. I turned a few more pages, and then my blood ran cold. There was a draft sheet filled with repeated signatures of Sarah Miller. The attempts were clumsy and uncertain, like someone practicing to forge her handwriting. Mark, he had forged my daughter's signature, not only to obtain custody of Ethan, but also to steal the house she had earned through so much effort. I stood there clutching the folders, feeling my blood boil with fury. He hadn't just abused Sarah physically. He was actively planning to steal everything from her. I pulled out my phone, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might shatter. I photographed every page of both documents, especially the signatures and the practice sheet. I tried to keep my hands steady, but with every click of the camera, my rage and fear mounted higher. If Mark appeared right then, I had no idea what might happen. When I finished, I carefully placed everything back exactly where I'd found it. I grabbed Sarah's briefcase and Ethan's books and hurried out of the house. As I got into the car, I took a deep breath to calm myself, my hands still gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. I drove back home, my mind reeling from what I'd just discovered. When I arrived, I didn't say anything at first. I simply handed my phone to Sarah and opened the photos I'd taken. Sarah looked at the screen. Her face turned deathly white. She shook her head repeatedly, her voice trembling. I never signed this. Mom, how could he? She didn't finish the sentence. She lowered her head, covering her face with her hands, her entire body shaking. I sat beside her and held her close, feeling her helplessness and pain. To help her calm down, I gave her a blank sheet of paper and a pen. Honey, sign here. I requested gently but firmly. Sarah obeyed. Her signature flowed elegantly across the paper, completely different from the forgeries. 2 signatures. One real, one fake. 2 opposite worlds. One representing my daughter's honesty, the other Mark's cruelty. That afternoon, I didn't hesitate. I called an old friend who had worked in the legal field and asked for the contact information of a skilled lawyer specializing in family law. She recommended Mrs. Catherine Reeves, an attorney known for her sharp mind and dedication. We scheduled an appointment for the following morning. When we arrived at her office, I showed her the photographs and recounted the entire story. Mrs. Reeves examined each image carefully. She compared the real and forged signatures side by side. Then she looked up at us, her voice firm and confident. This constitutes document forgery with intent to appropriate assets. With this evidence, we can not only file for unilateral divorce in Mrs. Miller's favor, but also press criminal charges against him. After meeting with attorney Catherine, I felt a small spark of hope ignite inside me. Mrs. Reeves immediately sent an official notification to Mark, requesting a meeting to discuss the division of assets and custody of Ethan. In the letter, she subtly hinted that we possessed damaging evidence. I thought it would be a direct hit, a way to make him back down. But I was wrong. That action was like sticking my hand into a hornet's nest. Mark didn't respond to the lawyer's letter. He remained ominously silent. But it wasn't the silence of someone giving up. It was a silence before a devastating storm. The next morning, when I went to market as I did every day, Mrs. Rose, my neighbor who always greeted me with a warm smile and asked about Ethan, looked at me with what seemed like pity. Then she quickly looked away, pretended not to see me, and hurried into her house. I stood there in the middle of the market with my basket in hand, feeling as if an invisible hand was squeezing my chest. What was happening? I rushed home, my heart full of anxiety. As soon as I walked through the door, my phone vibrated. It was Sarah. Her voice was trembling with panic, on the verge of tears. "Mom, come back immediately." A co-worker told me Mark went to my office and spoke to my boss. Sobbing, she continued. She said Mark cried in front of my boss, claiming I was suffering from severe postpartum depression, that my mental state was unstable, and that you, my own mother, had encouraged me to abandon my home. He had said it with a pained, desperate voice, as if he were a devoted husband trying to save his family. I felt my blood boil with fury. He dared to lie, to defame my daughter right at her workplace, the place where she'd fought so hard to build her career. Before I could process this, another call came in, this time from an employee at the Department of Social Services. Her cold, official voice requested that I come in to clarify possible acts of family interference and signs of mother-child separation. They claimed they'd received a medical certificate from Mark asserting that Sarah was unfit to care for Ethan due to psychological problems. I froze. The phone nearly fell from my hands. Mark had gone much further than I'd imagined. He didn't just want to take the house in custody. He wanted to destroy Sarah's reputation entirely, to make everyone believe she wasn't a reliable mother. That afternoon, I rushed home where Sarah and Ethan were staying. She was huddled on the sofa, hugging the boy tightly, her eyes swollen from crying. The little one, sensing the tension, was quietly scribbling on a piece of paper, but his eyes never stopped watching his mother with concern. I sat beside her, tried to offer words of comfort, when suddenly the door opened. Mark entered, followed by two neighbors I knew well. He didn't cross the threshold. He stood in the doorway, performing his role perfectly. He wiped away fake tears and said in a trembling voice, "I just want my wife and son to come back to me. Sarah isn't well, but I will take care of her. Only my mother-in-law insists on destroying my family." The neighbors looked at me with suspicion and reproach. One of them said to me with a compassionate but critical tone, "Mrs. Linda, you should let them solve their own problems. Fights between couples are normal. Getting involved only makes things worse." I wanted to scream, to show them the bruises on Sarah's arms, to explain the forged signatures, to describe the fear in Ethan's eyes. But I knew that even if I had 100 mouths, they wouldn't believe me. Mark had already cast me as the villain in his fabricated story. The pressure from work, from neighbors, and now from social services made Sarah completely break down. She barely spoke. She simply sat, clutching Ethan as if terrified someone would snatch him away. That night, Mark returned. He handed Sarah a blister pack of pills, his voice soft but chillingly icy. "Take these, Sarah. They're vitamins the doctor prescribed. They'll help stabilize you. Do this, and everything will return to how it was. If you don't, they'll think you really are sick, and they'll take Ethan away." I watched as my daughter, trembling, took the tranquilizer almost without thinking. My heart shattered. He wasn't just hurting her with words or violence anymore. He was now poisoning her mind, making her doubt her own sanity. As I was preparing to leave, Mark stopped me in the yard. He wasn't shouting like before. His voice was cold as ice. "You see, you have evidence of forged signatures, but I have a medical document proving my wife isn't stable. Who do you think the court will believe?" He moved close to my face with a threatening glare. "If you don't bring Sarah and Ethan back here tomorrow, I will file an emergency motion with the court requesting custody of Ethan because his mother has mental problems and has been kidnapped by her grandmother. Then your daughter will lose everything." I looked into his cruel eyes, and for the first time, I felt genuinely at a disadvantage. He had calculated everything, from manipulating public opinion to creating false documentation. I wanted to resist, to scream that I wouldn't let him win. But I knew that in the current situation, I didn't have sufficient strength. If he actually filed a motion with his lies and fraudulent papers, Sarah could lose Ethan forever. The thought paralyzed me. The next day, I swallowed my tears. I packed Sarah's and Ethan's belongings with my own trembling hands and took them both back to that house. Sarah looked at me with eyes brimming with tears. "Mom, I don't want to go back." I hugged her tightly and whispered, "Hold on just a little longer. Honey, I promise I will gather enough evidence to drag him down to hell he created for himself. As soon as I returned home, I called Attorney Catherine, my voice shaking. "Mrs. Reeves, I need a reliable private investigator. Mark is playing dirty, and I need concrete proof to unmask him." Mrs. Reeves agreed immediately and promised to introduce me to someone experienced. I withdrew all the savings I had left, money I'd saved for years to protect myself in old age, and contacted the private investigator Mrs. Reeves recommended. He was a middle-aged man with a sharp, penetrating gaze. He promised to follow Mark's every move, especially to find the origin of the fraudulent medical certificate he was using to slander Sarah. "Rest easy. I'll find the truth," he said in a low, confident voice. I nodded, but inside I couldn't stop worrying. While I waited, I tried to make everything appear normal. Every day, I brought food to Sarah's house, a plate of homemade tamales, some soup, or simply a box of fresh fruit. I told Mark it was to take care of Ethan, but really I was going to check if Sarah was safe. Every time I entered that house, my heart ached. The bougainvillea on the porch now had only a few thin, struggling branches, just like Sarah's spirit, worn down and battered. I secretly gave her a spare phone, hidden carefully in her blouse, and whispered, "Keep this to call me if you need help. Don't let him see it." Sarah nodded, her eyes grateful but still filled with fear. A week later, the detective called me. "Mrs. Linda, I have what you need," he said with confidence. I met him in a small cafe on the outskirts of town where no one would pay us attention. He handed me a small black USB drive. This video was recorded from a distance. The quality isn't perfect, but it's enough to see what's happening. I clutched the USB like it was a precious lifeline. When I got home, I plugged it into my computer, my heart racing wildly. The video appeared, slightly blurry but clear enough. Mark was in the parking lot behind a private clinic, handing a thick envelope to a man in a worn-out white coat. The man nodded and handed Mark a batch of papers stamped with an official-looking red seal. The detective also informed me that this man used to be a doctor, but his license had been revoked 2 years earlier for selling fraudulent documents. A chill ran down my spine. This was the proof I needed, the evidence to unmask Mark's lies completely. The next morning, I took the USB drive and the photograph of the forged signatures to the police station. The officer who took my report listened carefully and took detailed notes. "Mrs. Linda, with this evidence, we will open an investigation immediately," he assured me. I nodded, feeling relieved, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I thought that with just a little more time, Mark would finally pay for what he'd done. That evening, I drove to Sarah's house as usual, carrying a box of flan that Ethan loved. I felt lighter, thinking it was all going to end soon. But as I approached the gate, I heard a loud crash from inside, as if something heavy had collapsed. Then came Mark's furious voice yelling, "You dare to report me? You want me to destroy you? Is that it?" His voice sounded like a wild beast's. My heart sank. I ran inside without thinking. The scene left me breathless. The glass dining table was overturned, fragments scattered everywhere. Sarah was hugging Ethan tightly, both of them huddled in a corner as she tried to shield it with her own body. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes red and terrified. When Mark saw me, he became even more enraged. He swept everything off the coffee table, glasses, picture frames, a small vase, all of it shattering at his feet. "You too," he yelled, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You think you can destroy my family?" Ethan, seized by fear, broke free from his mother's arms and ran to his father, clinging to his legs while crying hysterically. "Daddy, please don't hurt Mommy." The boy's voice trembled, begging for the impossible. But Mark, blinded by fury, didn't even look down. He kicked his leg hard to shake the boy off, as if he were merely an annoying obstacle. The forceful push made Ethan lose his balance and fall backward. His head struck the sharp wooden edge of the coffee table. The dull thud of impact stole my breath completely. A second of icy silence filled the room. Then I saw a gash open on Ethan's temple, and bright red blood began oozing slowly, dripping onto the floor. I screamed, a scream that tore through my throat, as if all the pain inside me burst out at once. I ran toward him without thinking, without fear. With all my strength, I slapped Mark hard across the face. The sound echoed like an explosion, making him stagger backward. I didn't look at him again. I simply scooped Ethan into my arms. The boy was fading, his eyes closed, his small face alarmingly pale. "Ethan, it's me, your grandma. Wake up, please. I called to..."